Well, it's time to start, and I'd like to welcome our two Canadian friends at the back here that have come here just to listen to this lecture today, Grahame. They're from the West Coast in America. They're on holidays. Canada always has excess water, and we always have excess sun, but she challenged me on that statement. Anyway, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the Royal Historical Society for this our monthly lecture, and it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome our guest speaker today, Grahame Jardine-Vidgen. And if you know these monthly lectures, which we've been doing for a long, long time, since 1913, he hasn't been here all those years, but he has been here from about 1960s, and every month he turns up and sits there. And he comes from a very eminent family. The Jardine-Vidgens, they were Scottish, obviously, but they came to Australia, and then they, one of them went north and settled in right North Queensland, drove cattle up there, and it's a really fascinating story. And so Grahame's going to talk about the story and up north. And I must say, many years ago, Glenda and I, this is in 1996, I think it was, we drove up north, went to the site where your family had their house, and went to the next door where the graves still are there. So we've actually seen your forebears' graves at Somerset. Excellent. On North Queensland. And that's not far from the Adolphus Channel. You know, the Quetta came through there and hit a rock, and it sank, and there was a lot of deaths. And it was right there. And it's so rough, it's nearly impossible for a ship to land there, in fact. Anyway, so welcome, Grahame. And so I invite you to take the podium, and we look forward to listening to your address. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Grahame Lascelles Jardine-Vidgen, and I am the historian of the Jardine and Vidgen families of Somerset, Cape York, North Queensland. The aim of my short address today is to acquaint you with the history of the Jardine and Vidgen families of Cape York, and to present a précis of our known recorded history for your edification. Ostensibly, my lecture is a slideshow, so please watch the screen. Now, my earliest authentically traceable Jardine ancestor was one Wilfredus du Jardin, Wilfred of the Garden, a lowly Norman knight who came over with William the Conqueror from Normandy to England and fought at the Battle of Hastings. That's what a Norman knight looked like, and there's a reenactment of the Battle of Hastings. For his services to King William, he was granted lands in the lowland border area of Scotland at Applegirth in Dumfriesshire, near the present-day town of Lockerbie, over which the big Pan Am jet blew up just prior to Christmas Eve in 1988. Gaddafi's mob from Libya put a bomb on it and blew it up. In the early 1300s, the Jardines supported Robert the Bruce in his quest for the Scottish crown, being one of only 10 supporters who accompanied the Bruce into exile, for which services they were later granted part of the Bruce's coat of arms. You'll see there the cross saltire on the shield and the motto Caveat Sum, where I am present. At the Battle of Hastings in 1314, it is recorded that the Jardines slew the English knight de Lucy. A painting of it. In the 1460s, stemming from royal patronage, the Jardines of Applegirth built a new 4-storied stone tower, known as a keep, which they call Spedlin's Tower. This is what it looked like for many centuries. That's what it looks like today, and one of my relatives lives in it. Then, in the 1700s, when a new Jardine Hall was erected around 1710, there's a drawing of it. This hall was refurbished in the 1796 era, but unfortunately was destroyed by fire in 1814 when a new Jardine Hall was erected on the same site. We see here that's what it was then, and this is what it looked like in more modern times. In the 1660s, with the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II, following Cromwell and the Roundheads, Sir Alexander Jardine raised a regiment of soldiers for service in Canada and was created a baronet of Nova Scotia in 1672. You see Jardine NS 1672, and I come in down the bottom there somewhere, Grahame Jardine-Vidgen. Now, in the 1820s, a Dr. William Jardine went to China, where he founded the Jardine Matheson Shipping Company, along with that other fellow, Williams on your left and Matheson's on the right. William's nephew, Robert Jardine, inherited his fortune and built a castle called Castlemilk, a fairy tale castle near Lockerbie in the 1860s. That's what it looks like now. He also entered Parliament and was also created a baronet in 1885. Another famous Jardine of the 1800s was Sir William Jardine, who was a famous naturalist who wrote many books on flora and fauna. It was he who made further extensions to the great Jardine Hall, which unfortunately and regrettably had to be gutted and demolished in 1964 to avoid the payment of horrendous death duties. The government levied £2 billion of death duties on them. They couldn't afford it, so they pulled the place down, used all the stones to line the waterways, sold off every nut and bolt, and brought it down to about £300,000, which they somehow managed to rake up. Now we jump to Australia. In 1835, my great-great-grandfather, Captain John Jardine, son of Sir Alexander Jardine, the 6th Baronet, sold his commission in the Royals, which is the Blues and Royals of the Household Cavalry, and emigrated to Sydney, Australia, arriving on the 4th of January 1840. He took up land in the southern Orange district of New South Wales and ran sheep on his property. Now my great-grandfather, his son, was born in 1841. Just as a matter of interest, I was born in 1941. The family suffered serious pecuniary losses in the great droughts of the late 1840s and were obliged to quit their property. Captain John Jardine managed to secure the position of Commissioner of Crown Lands for the Bligh district of New South Wales in 1848. His eldest son, my great-grandfather, this fellow here, there's another photo of him, was born in 1841, was educated at the King's School, Parramatta, while his younger brother, Alexander, born 1843, was educated at the Sydney Grammar School. A third son, John Robert Jardine, was born in 1847, and he was the great-grandfather of my late cousin Murray Jardine of Toowoomba, who was the Chief's Commissioner for the Jardine Clan Society in Australia prior to his demise in 2004. I am now the Chief's representative in Australia. There was a younger son, Charles Lennox Jardine, born 1855, who, following an altercation with his older brother Frank, departed the Somerset Cape York property and distanced himself from the family. There is no reference to him in any of the family records apart from his demise in 1908. Now, in 1859, the colony of Queensland was separated from New South Wales. Captain John Jardine, through his social connections, was appointed Gold Commissioner and Police Magistrate of a new fledgling township of Rockhampton, Queensland. In 1864, the Queensland colonial government decided to establish a presence at the very tip of Cape York. There you can see the tip of Cape York, and the arrow shows where the residency was built. The governor, Sir George Ferguson Bowen, appointed Captain John Jardine to be the Commissioner of Crown Lands and Police Magistrate of the new settlement to be named Somerset, after the Duke of Somerset, First Lord of the Admiralty and the Commissioner of Crown Lands. He provided the money and everything for this expedition. Captain John Jardine arrived with 2 vessels, the HMS Salamander, you see there, and the Golden Eagle, together with a detachment of Royal Marines under a Lieutenant Pascoe. They didn't wear those clothes, of course, there. And some 30 or so government workers. It was decided to overland cattle to the new settlement to feed the anticipated influx of settlers, who it was thought would develop Somerset property into a new Singapore. In October 1864, the Overland Party set out under the leadership of Frank Jardine. That's Frank seated on the left. His younger brother Alec on the right, the second in command, with the chap standing at the left on the rear, was Archibald Richardson, the official government surveyor, and three other white stockmen, Charles Scrutton, Richard Binney and Alf Cowderoy. I haven't got photos of them. There were also four native police troopers, Eula, Peter, Sambo and Barney, a couple of them seated in front. They departed the then Carpentaria Down station near the present-day Townsville on the 11th of October 1864 with 250 head of cattle, 41 horses and a mule. 6 Caucasians of the Overland Party were each armed with a single-shot Calisher and Terry capping breech loader and 2 English 5-shot Tranter percussion revolvers, while the 4 native police troopers each carried muzzle-loading carbines. After only a few weeks, on the 5th of November 1864, they suffered a disastrous loss through a campfire, destroying most of their food, their provisions, the saddlery, the clothing and the ammunition for their weapons. They were left only with the clothes that they were wearing and the contents of their saddlebags, together with a few pounds of flour and 10 pounds of tea, with all of the other food items being lost. Rather than turn back, they decided to push on, and so one of the most incredible feats of Queensland pioneering history was undertaken. Each time the party crossed a new river, they entered a new Aboriginal tribal territory. You'll see the red line showing where they went up the west coast. The natives would dispute their passing with numerous attacks and running off any stray stock. They decided to traverse the west coast as Edmund Kennedy, there's poor old Edmund Kennedy speared in the back, had come to grief and lost his life in 1848 by endeavouring to reach the tip while travelling up the east coast through the rainforests. That's where Kennedy was speared on the Escape River, and you can see the tip of Cape York. So they proceeded north until in mid-December 1864 they reached the mighty Mitchell River. There's a map just showing you where the Mitchell River is on the Gulf of Carpentaria. Here they were attacked by about 100 heavily armed natives. That's an artist's impression of the Jardines galloping past the natives, one of the Indians. The party had to defend itself in earnest, but spears were no match for firearms, and though the Overlanders suffered no severe losses, over 30 natives were left as casualties on the field of battle. This unfortunate skirmish became known as the Battle of the Mitchell River. The party was now in the middle of the wet season and were losing cattle to flooded rivers, poisonous weeds and native attack. By the end of January 1865, they came to a river which they thought was the Escape River, discovered by Kennedy, which they presumed would lead them to the east to the Somerset settlement. However, there's the Escape River. However, after following the river for some time, it flowed away to the west coast, so they named it the Deception River. Later, in honour of their exploits, the Queensland colonial government decided to rename it the Jardine River, and now flows through the Jardine River National Park. Finally, on the 15th of March 1865, the Overland Party arrived at the Somerset settlement, which had been set up by the father over the previous 6 months or so. A couple of different photos here. Whilst they had lost most of their horses, over 200 head of cattle made it to the tip, where they now form the nucleus of the vast numbers of wild cattle roaming the tip of Cape York. There's some photos. That's the residency as it was, and there's the hospital. These were all prefabbed by GAs and taken up and put up by Captain John Jardine and his work team. In December 1865, Captain John Jardine returned to his family, his magisterial duties at Rockhampton. That's Mrs. Jardine and the 2 Jardine girls. And here we see Captain John Jardine in the middle, Frank on his right, and Alec over on the far side. And then young Charles Lennox Jardine, we don't know much about him, I'm afraid. Come to him later. The eldest son, Frank, my great-grandfather, stayed on to look after the settlement. Frank served a number of terms as resident administrator from 1868 to 1873, along with other administrators such as Captain Henry Simpson, that's he and his wife on the veranda of the Somerset settlement. There was a Captain Henry Chester, who was a naval lieutenant, and then finally a Captain Charles Bedone. Now, the younger brother, Alec Jardine, also departed for Brisbane, where he married and became the government engineer for harbours and roads and bridges, and supervised the construction of the old Gympie Road. Alec had a daughter, Stella, who married Colonel Donald Cameron, who was the commanding officer of the 5th Light Horse Regiment in Palestine during World War I. That's him in his Scotty gear. As a major, he led the 12th Light Horse in the great cavalry charge of Beersheba in Palestine on the 31st of October 1917. Later, as Sir Donald Cameron, he was the president of the RSL for many years and the officer in charge of recruiting during World War II. The younger brother, John Robert Jardine, we've seen him before, returned to Rockhampton and with his father, and later took up land in the Richmond district of Queensland. This branch of the family is related to such well-known early Queensland families as the Murray Pryors and the Campbell Prades. In 1867, my great-grandfather Frank Jardine took up land west of the Somerset property and called it Lockerbie. You can see where Lockerbie is there. And there's Lockerbie on the name in front of a little old building. This property passed into the hands of the Holland family and used to be owned by Mrs. Anne Hall, if she's still alive. Now, in 1873, a missionary schooner called at Somerset. There's the property up on top of the hill with the flagstaff and the beach down below. On board was a beautiful young 16-year-old Samoan girl called Sama Salia Safala. She's a bit older there. She was niece of Moliatoa, King of Samoa. Frank and Sana fell in love and were married on the 16th of October 1873. Frank resigned his government position and the couple moved to Nagi Island, which is now Mount Ernest Island out in Torres Strait, where Frank had pearling and copper interests and engaged a large number of Indigenous people in his various business activities. In 1877, the official government residence of Somerset was abandoned, with the administration relocated to Thursday Island. Frank and Sana Jardine returned to Somerset and took up a 99-year lease. Those little people in the front are my grandmother and her younger brother Chumley. Now, on the 21st of June 1878, my grandmother Alice Moore Lascelles Jardine was born, the oldest of the 4 Jardine children, followed by Hugh Herries Chumley Lascelles Jardine, born 1881, and Bertie Bootle Arthur Lascelles Jardine, born 1884. They love those big names. And Elizabeth Hamilton Sana Lascelles was the youngest child, born 1895. I had the pleasure of knowing her in her latter years. Now, in 1886, the 2 Jardine brothers were honoured by the Royal Geographical Society for their overland trek to Cape York in 1864. That's Frank seated and Alex standing. And each of them was presented with a suitably engraved gold watch. There's the watch there. It says the Murchison grant of the Royal Geographical Society for 1885, awarded to Alexander Jardine for his overland journey to Cape York in 1864. Now, you heard Stephen say before about the RMS Quetta. On the 28th of February 1890, the Royal Mail ship Quetta, with 292 passengers and crew en route from Sydney to England, struck an uncharted rock in the Adolphus Channel near Cape York and sank within 3 minutes with a loss of 134 lives. The Titanic took an hour and a half, so it went in 3 minutes. Frank Jardine sent out a small boat to rescue survivors and provide assistance and medical assistance to them. This was Queensland's worst maritime disaster. Now we jump to the 1890s and come to the Vidgens. In 1890, young Herbert Grahame Vidgen, that was my grandfather, known as Bert, arrived at Cape York to be the accountant for the James Clark and Co., the noted pearlers of that era. This fellow's father, my great-great-grandfather, James Grahame Vidgen, was the music master at Cumbria College, Scotland, and emigrated to Brisbane on the Legion of Honour, arriving on the 28th of February 1866. The Vidgens built a home which they called Lomere on the river at Hamilton near the Breakfast Creek, adjacent to the Brett's Wharf and the old Hamilton fire station. However, this property was inundated in the 1893 flood, so they moved out to the Enoggera area and built a home which they called the Haven, which stood where Brookside Shopping Centre is now. Vidgen's paddock was part of the World War I Army staging complex, and it shows you there the tents of the soldiers. They were all the light horses that were staged there. Now, James Grahame Vidgen, that's him there in later years, was the secretary of the South Brisbane Gas Works, which in the days of gas lighting was akin to a municipal appointment. He brought out the first pipe organ for the old St John's Cathedral, which is now in the old All Saints Anglican Church in Ann Street near Central Station. This organ was only refurbished in the recent decades. Now, James Vidgen, again another photo of him, was one of the founding Commodores of the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron, 1894-95, where silver trophies presented by him are now held on display. Now, this fellow's son, my grandfather Bert Vidgen, soon met Frank Jardine. There's Frank Jardine, his horse, and his daughter Alice. My grandmother Alice, riding side saddle, you'll notice, like a lady, up on her father's horse. Romance blossomed, and Bert and Alice Vidgen were married in 1900 in the Anglican Quetta Memorial Church on Thursday Island. Bert was now the master of the schooner Olive and had been instrumental in saving many lives in the big cyclone Mahina of 1899, in which 3 schooners and 50 luggers were lost and over 300 divers were drowned. There we can see the Olive with my grandfather grading pearl shell on the Olive. The next photo shows you the poor old Olive after the cyclone. My grandfather, being a sailor, threw his anchor out over midships, and the schooner went round and around in the cyclone and survived. All the other schooners, which anchored fore and aft, foundered and sank. My grandfather went round and rescued all the people in the water. Now, my father, Herbert Somerset Boy Vidgen, was born 1901. His nickname Boy was given to him by his great-grandfather, Frank Jardine, who called him the Boy. Down up on his grandfather's horse. He was followed by his brothers Gordon's down the front, my father's at the back, and another son, Frank, born 1909. The Vidgens built a home which they 3 miles north of Somerset, which they call Pyra. And there's a number of shots now. The native name was Stingray, which abounded in the waters of the bay. See there in a moment, the blue arrow comes up, shows you where the Vidgens built their residency. These are a few shots of the home back at that time. You can see my grandfather Bert, my grandfather Alice, father Boy Vidgen, Gordon and Frank, and the little girl who looked after them. With the advent of World War I, they abandoned Pyra and moved over to Thursday Island, where they purchased a big home of Mr. Adams, the ex-Burnsville shipping manager, who had returned to Sydney. I believe the Jardine Hotel Motel stands on that site now. Now there's a final photo here of my grandparents, Bert and Alice Vidgen, in their senior years. Now Frank Jardine died in 1919 and Sana, his wife, in 1923. Their eldest son, Chum, had gone to Dobo in the Aru Islands to run a coconut plantation. We see Chum Jardine sitting on the right there, and my father Boy Vidgen in the middle with the black blazer on. These are a few photos of the coconut plantation in Dobo in Indonesia. They ran the plantation and used the coconuts for copper and stuff like that. Righto. Now, Uncle Chum took with him 41 volumes of his father's diaries, which were subsequently lost during World War II. I have in my possession a newspaper clipping where the Mitchell Library in Sydney offered the family many £1,000s for the diaries. They were all lost. His younger brother, Bootle Jardine, buried his parents on the beach at Somerset and built a small monument by their graves. The rear is Frank's grave and in the front is Sarah's. Now, in 1925, my father, Boy Vision, there he is, purchased the old Somerset property from his uncles Chum and Bootle Jardine and ran it as a coconut plantation and cattle property. There you can see the coconut plantation and the residency, and that's the bay out in the front. Now we'll see a few photos of the people collecting coconuts and things on the plantation. In 1934, my father constructed a landing ground a few miles north. You see a little aeroplane there and a big limestone cross there. Another couple of photos coming up here. Time delay. There we see a little plane there and the big limestone cross in front of it so you don't run over the edge. Another photo coming up soon. There it is, that's Albany Pass, looking up Albany Pass towards Cape. Another photo coming up in a moment. There it is, that's my mother on the left with a hand on a hat. My father standing under the wing of a little plane on the landing ground. Now, many noted aviators landed here over the years. There's my father with Lord Semple, who flew around the world, also Chichester, Francis Chichester, he came over that way too. Another photo coming up of Barbara Hitchens, who used to fly from Sydney to New Guinea and land on the airstrip, and that's my mother who's about to go up the flight. She hasn't been up yet, but she's still smiling. Okay. I have a letter to my father from Joseph Lyons, the Prime Minister of Australia, thanking him for his services to the Crown for building the airfield. He never sent a cheque, however. Now, on this landing ground, my father built a galvanised iron shed to store fuel and oils, and you can see a little aeroplane and the shed and a big windstorm. It was in this shed they stored fuel and oils, but life was not easy. And sometimes the cattle would have to come down from there's a property up there with the plantation behind it. The cattle would come down and walk along the beach, and sometimes a crocodile would attack a beast. My auntie Nin Garlic from Sydney and my mother Werner. Auntie Nin Garlic ran the J.C. Williamson's theatre group and imported the first hygienic paper cups into Australia between the wars. Now, my father would lie wait in the sand dunes with his dog tied up at the water's edge with a piece of thin string. When the crocs charged up out of the water, the poor dog would break the string and take off for the homestead, and my dad would shoot the croc through its open mouth with his .303 rifle. There's my dad, the doctor from Thursday Island, and the poor old croc. I would point out that they didn't shoot these crocs for sport, but they couldn't have them coming there where they were landing. In front of the homestead were a number of old ship's cannon, various views of them there. These cannon had been retrieved from a shipwreck by Frank Jardine in 1890. There we can see my father sitting on the steps with the doctor from PI in front, the overseer on the right, and one of the native stockmen and a couple of more old cannon. Along with the cannon, Frank Jardine recovered 1,578 pounds weight of bullion. That's over half a tonne of bullion, most of which was converted into a dinner service. There's one of the sets, fish knife, fork, etc. like that, and on the handles it has KB Adson, Beware I Am Present, the family monarch. In 1934, my mother, Beatrice Werner Reed, was her maiden name, whose parents owned a pineapple farm at Mumbai, near the Big Pineapple, topped her tropical nursing exam and at the Brisbane Women's Hospital, and was appointed senior sister in tropical medicine at the Torres Strait Hospital, Thursday Island. My mother, who was always known by her maiden name of Werner, she hated Beatrice because it sounded like beetroot and worms, completed her basic nursing training in 1927. She went to the Auburn Hospital in Sydney to do a midwifery certificate and returned to do tropical medicine in the 1930s. When the examination results were published, my mother had topped the course and as a result was offered the position of senior sister in tropical medicine in the Torres Strait Hospital, Thursday Island. Not knowing exactly where TI was, Werner went home to discuss the matter with her parents at the Woombye Pineapple Farm. They suggested that she go and see the world and accept the appointment. She returned to Brisbane on the Saturday train, and on the Monday she went out and purchased a tropical nursing kit. Now, as the ship, the SS Taiping, which was to take her to Thursday Island, sailed from Brett's Wharf at 6:30, my mother phoned for a taxi. Unfortunately, they had an accident at the corner of the street and had to wait for another taxi to come. On arriving at the wharf at 6:30 p.m, a distraught Werner, with shoes in one hand and a suitcase in the other, ran barefoot and crying along the wharf, calling on the ship to wait. Once on board, the captain informed my mother that he had strict instructions not to sail until the nursing sister for Thursday Island was safely on board. And so my mother went to Thursday Island, arriving just before Christmas 1934. Many years later, in the 1960s, my mother returned to her beloved nursing as a senior sister in obstetrics at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, prior to her final retirement. However, we haven't finished with it yet. At the age of 66, she was engaged as a senior night sister at Hopetown, the aged people's home at Corinda, and continued until they realised that at 78 years of age, she was older than some of the patients and retired her for good. We also have other connections with the medical fraternity. Another relative of mine was Sister Althea Vidgen, nicknamed Girly Vidgen, who was matron of Royal Brisbane Hospital. I also have a cousin, Dr. Peter Vidgen, who practiced down on the Gold Coast, while Dorothy Hawkins, the older sister of my wife Judy, was a maternal and child welfare clinic sister in Toowoomba. So now let us return to the original narrative of my mother's arrival at Thursday Island. My grandmother, Alice Vidgen, arranged for my father, Boy Vidgen, to meet the nursing sister at the wharf and drive her to the hospital. A number of photos here. There's my dad in the front there with his little hat on, and another photo of the Taiping on its way to China at the end of the wharf. 6 months after my mother assumed her appointment, the incumbent matron resigned and my mother was appointed matron of Thursday Island Hospital. From this innocent meeting with my father at the wharf, a romance developed and my parents were married in 1936. My father was forced to resign. My mother was forced to resign her position as matron, and she lived with my father in the old Somerset residency on Cape York. There it was in the 1930s, a bit the worse for wear after the Depression. This they ran as a holiday resort conjointly with their plantation and cattle interests. They used to charge people £2 a week to come and stay there. My father also purchased a smart little motor launch, which he named the Somerset, in which my parents would travel over to Thursday Island each month to obtain supplies. On Thursday Island, they would stay in their island home. There it is there, my father in the front and my grandparents in the rear. And they'd go and visit the other relatives on the island. With the threat of war looming, they decided to start a family. Here I am, born on the 27th of November 41 in the TI hospital. I was the last white child christened in the Quetta Anglican Memorial Cathedral on TI prior to the evacuation of the Wall of White inhabitants in 1942. At the end of February 42, with the Japanese coming over the Kokoda Track towards Port Moresby, it was decided to evacuate all the Caucasians from Thursday Island, and so my mother, with me as a baby in arms, boarded the old SS Ormiston, there's a coastal steamer, that took us down to Cairns, where they boarded a train for all points south. My mother went to Nambour to go to her parents at the pineapple farm at Mumbai. Now, my father had been in the militia before the war, serving as a sergeant, while his father, Vidgen, had been the captain. Following my mobilisation, my grandfather, Vidgen, was retired, being considered too old for active service. My father was transferred to the AIF, called up into the wireless guard, and was later seconded to the water transport small ships as a ship's pilot to guide the Americans through the waters of Torres Strait. My dad had walked over most of Torres Strait with a big brass helmet on doing pearl diving in his younger days. As the American officers refused to take orders from an Aussie sergeant, he was commissioned a lieutenant, later promoted to captain, and retired as a major on discharge at the end of the war. During the war years, my dad transferred many items of interest from the old Somerset homestead to the galvanised iron shed on the landing ground at Point Fly, about a kilometre south of the homestead. You can see the galvanised iron shed there, the windsock and a plane on it. After the war, my mother refused to return to Cape York, as there were now 3 children to consider. My younger twin brothers, John and Bruce, being born in 1944, so my father was reluctantly forced to quit his dream of returning to the idyllic lifestyle he had lived in Somerset, Cape York, although he did return in 1948 to retrieve all of the items stored in the old tent shed on the airfield. These artefacts and memorabilia included all the Somerset Visitors Book, oil paintings, numerous photos, and various old weapons which now form part of the Jardine-Vidgen collection, of which I am the custodian. That's my armed security den at home. It's all held under police licence, so I'm not doing anything wrong. And they're all about 150 years old. If you hit them over the head, it wouldn't do any good. In 1986, I flew to Cape York as a guest of Sir Sidney Williams for the official opening of the then Cape York Wilderness Lodge. So you see it, I don't think it exists anymore today. It was opened by Sir Joby Elkie Peterson, and there's Sidney Williams sitting with him in the yard. In 1989, as a guest of Ron Moon of 4x4 Australia and TV documentary fame, I was privileged to retrace the steps of my Jardine ancestors by 4-wheel drive vehicles from Carpentaria Down Station, overland all the way to the tip of Cape York. The old homestead is long gone, being destroyed by the ravages of white ants and fire. Nothing now remains but the nostalgic memories of this historical era and the lonely graves of my Jardine and Vidgen ancestors on the beach at Cape York. There's a photo of the old cannon remounted. There's the graves on the tip of Cape York. Finally, there's the tip of Cape York itself. Now, in conclusion, I was educated at Graceville Primary in Brisbane Grammar, as employed by the National Australia Bank as a senior accountant legal officer. I was a captain on the reserve of officers and in the 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment at Nogga, which was an Army Corps regiment. I'm a director of the Light Horse Museum. I'm a member of the Royal Historical Society, so I'm here today. Member of the Royal Geographic Society. I'm a Scottish Knights Templar, member of the Society of Antiquities of Scotland, and many other things, as you can see by all the badges I wear on my coat. I am also a past master of my lodge, and in 2009 my cousin in Scotland, Sir William Jardine of Applegarth Baronet, who was the chief of Clan Jardine, appointed me chieftain of the Jardine clan in Australia. I am married to a lovely lady, my wife Judy, who regrettably now suffers from, that's me as my chieftain of the Jardines. There's my wife Judy, who now suffers from multiple sclerosis and is virtually confined to a wheelchair. I have 3 daughters, Catherine the eldest. She works at QIMR, Berghofer, a researcher there at Royal Brisbane Hospital. She is married and has 3 daughters. Melinda, our second daughter, that's Melinda there. She's an optometrist And at the moment, or she's married to Stephen Toomey, who recently won the LNP seat for the Capt. And they have my only grandson, Timothy Toomey, and a granddaughter. And Melinda has just recently completed her PhD, and she's now involved in the glaucoma research at the University of St Lucia. My youngest daughter, there she is on the right at the front in the blue. She is a construction site on-site secretary and a documentary programmer with Santos, the big mining company. My younger brother John was the IT training manager. There he is, my father and I, many years ago, up in Torres Strait, based on Thursday Island Hospital. He was retired Army infantry officer on the reserve. He was a member of the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron and the Royal Queensland Aero Club and a qualified pilot. Regrettably, John suffered from Alzheimer's disease and passed away in June 2014. His twin brother Bruce, there he is there, he was a senior active Rotarian and a member of the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron. Like myself, he was retired and lived on Carragara Island in Borden Bay. He spent his retirement years sailing around on his big yacht. Unfortunately, Bruce, who lived with his wife Audrey in a townhouse at Halcyon Green at Pimpamar near the Gold Coast, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and dementia and passed away in 2022. As neither of my brothers had produced any issue and I only had girls, it would appear that the Jardine-Vidgen name is now about to become extinct after all these generations. So I now wish to express my gratitude for the opportunity to address you today. Thank you for your interest.